Okay, I referenced this particular author and his book, one of our sessions, but it really plays into this evening's conversation on the role of ethnicity and the kind of fading ethnicity of American culture, and something that I believe needs to be reclaimed and reinstated in our own kind of corporate perception of what society and culture should be in terms of the groups, as opposed to just merely the continuing aggrandizement of the individual at the expense of kind of a corporate entity. So, in 1970, Philip Slater wrote this book that really reflected a lot of what was changing in American culture. You may or may not have been aware of it at the time, but I'm going to read to you now from the opening of the book, because it is startling. I don't think you can read it, but I will. Once upon a time, there was a man who sought escape from the prattle of his neighbors and went to live alone in a hut he had found in the forest. At first he was content, but a bitter winter led him to cut down the trees around the hut for firewood. The next summer he was hot and uncomfortable. Because his hut had no shade, and he complained bitterly of the harshness of the elements. He made a little garden and kept some chickens, but rabbits were attracted by the food in the garden and ate much of it. The man went into the forest and trapped a fox, which he tamed and taught to catch rabbits. But the fox ate up the man's chickens as well. The man shot the fox and cursed the perfidy of the creatures of the wild. The man always threw his refuse on the floor of his hut, and soon it swarmed with vermin. He then built an ingenious system of hooks and pulleys so that everything in the hut could be suspended from the ceiling. But the strain was too much for the flimsy hut, and it soon collapsed. The man grumbled about the inferior construction of the hut and built himself a new one. One day he boasted to a relative in his old village about the peaceful beauty and the plentiful game surrounding his forest home. The relative was impressed and reported back to his neighbors, who began to use the area for picnics and hunting excursions. The man was upset by this and cursed the intrusiveness of mankind. He began posting signs, setting traps, and shooting at those who come near his dwelling. In revenge, groups of boys would come at night from time to time to frighten him and steal things. The man took to sleeping every night in a chair by the window with a loaded shotgun across his knees. One night he turned in his sleep and shot off his foot. The villagers were chastened and saddened by his misfortune, and thereafter stayed away from his part of the forest. The man became lonely and cursed the unfriendliness and indifference of his former neighbors. And in all this, the man saw no agency except what lay outside himself, for which reason, and because of his ingenuity, the villagers called him the American. I want you to think about that. And I want you to think about how many of you really know your neighbors? How many of you reach out to others? Or are we all become this wonderfully brilliant word that's so much fun to say, xenophobic, fearful of others, of strangers? This book was written in 1970. And the question that I ask you tonight, is that the America we are becoming? And is that the America you want it to be? Well, it seems I pulled the wrong one, but I think I'm coming here. Okay. Any of you familiar with this book, Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam? It was written 25 years ago. Political scientist argues that Americans are becoming increasingly disconnected from community and civic life, and this decline in trust in what binds a society is evidenced by lower participation in social and political groups, with bowling leagues used as a metaphor for this withdrawal. I asked the question, how many of you used to be in bowling leagues? How many of you are still in bowling leagues? How many of you know where there's a bowling alley? Okay. I mean, that was, according to Putnam, the continuation of this cycle that began in the 50s about how America has been evolving on the almost 75 years. So, Putnam identified decreased civic engagement. Americans are participating in fewer community organizations, signing fewer petitions, and have weaker ties with neighbors and friends, and the rise of individualism to a more communal, suggests a shift from a communal we to a more solitary I. I used to ask students as they were in classes about where they got their values from. And I would ask them to try and make a kind of a graph between whether they received it from the community that they lived in, the society, or from their parents. I will tell you tragically, in more recent years, they don't even understand the question, because they don't necessarily see even the conflict between those. Because people have become their own authorities, and you sense that all the time in the way in which people interact with others. Either they just hang out with their own crowd, because to have the conversation, and remember, it's not that long ago when it was very common on news shows and commentators to talk about how families don't even get together for Thanksgiving anymore, because they're frightened of the interaction of family members who don't believe the way they do. As opposed to sitting and talking and having a conversation, even though you may disagree with someone, the idea now is it's Mortal Kombat. These are out of line, and I apologize for that. But go back to the slide from 1912, which was Fiddler on the Roof. This is the Chagall work of the Fiddler on the Roof. Oh, look at this, I really am out of line here. Causes of decline. Putnam identifies several contributing factors: television, suburbanization and sprawl, longer commutes, more isolation, housing patterns, decreased community cohesion. I have to find the right slides for tonight, and I'm going to apologize and back out of this. I'm sorry. Yeah, please do. You get to watch everything, no you don't.
And while they're talking, they're on the phone looking for...
Any families, when you get together, put limits on what you can discuss? You know, no religion, no politics at the table. No,
But
I'm
isn't
serious.
that a shame though? Because I remember when I was little, my parents.
No, I'm talking about now. Little is
And all we
different.
did was talk politics.
Okay, I found it.
Together.
Now can we,
No, wait, keep going. I have to figure out how to do this.
I guess.
yeah.
I guess we avoid it, yeah. It depends, you'll know your crowd.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, but,
And if you know your crowd,
and you get crowd,
It's not,
but I've seen
got
it
it.
in relative.
It's back.
gatherings,
Yes.
so, our relative. Because we know some of the
Okay.
politically, especially politically oriented, you just don't even go there.
I know, it's a shame.
Anyway, I'm just curious, others experience the same thing.
Okay. So when I was this was the one I wanted to share with you tonight. I had different presentations. So the rise of individualism, and what I added to this, which wasn't in the first set of slides, was remember the me generation? When that became the conversation in the late 80s, early 90s, there was some people would walk around with these business cards with the writing of Fritz Perls. Remember this? I'm only in the world for myself, not for you. Remember these? It's only exacerbated. Older generations were more socially connected than their younger ones. leading to long-term decline. The consequences, weakened democracy. Does that resonate in the room? A decline in civic engagement is seen as a threat to democracy. Well, if everybody is purely an individual, how do you build consensus? How do you, in any way, interact in the world of ideas in our society and our culture? So we're back to the fiddler. Marc Chagall, some of you know his work, certainly. So Tevye the Milkman, originally originated by Sholem Rabinovitz, who was known as Sholem Aleichem, a great Yiddish writer, lived 1859 to 1960, and he wrote about poverty and anti-Semitism in Europe, and the legacy of his work has continued to withstand the test of time due to the transformation of the idea into the Broadway musical Fiddler on the Roof. He began to write short stories about Tevye the Dairyman in 1894 and continued until 1916. The original Broadway production of the show opened in 1964. Did any of you see it then? Okay. It was the first musical theater run in history to surpass 3,000 performances. Held the longest running Broadway musical for almost 10 years. And there have been 5 and probably more now productions of Fiddler on the Roof. So you can see the volume of it and its impact. But what's intriguing, and many of you are unaware of this, it premiered in Tokyo on September 6, 1967. It has since been mounted in Japan more than 1,300 times. Now, when you think of Fiddler, you may think of it in the narrow sense that it is a reflection of a Jewish experience. But what we have learned and what you will see is that it has become universalized in terms of ethnic identity and migration that takes place and the pain of migration, even though it may be for a better life. Tokyo wasn't the first time Fiddler has been in another language. A production in southern Holland 23 years ago, and here it is in Japan. That's the Tevye in Japan. Well, think about the cross-cultural reality of how this was embraced in Japan. In 2007, Time magazine ranked Fiddler on the Roof the 7th most frequently produced musical in American high schools. It's been translated into Spanish, it's played in South America, and it is a symbol of identity that has gotten translated into American ethnic culture in the Catskills, and clearly among cultures all over the world. So the Catskills. The Catskills come to life, and people all learned about the Borscht Belt. Does anybody eat borscht? No. Okay, I want to ask. Okay. By the end of the 19th century, the railroads brought masses of vacationers to Sullivan County. Catskills were an important destination where tuberculosis patients could convalesce, just like in Colorado. Tuberculosis was fairly common during this time. In 1914, Selig Grosingers, a Jewish immigrant, moved his family to the Catskills in an attempt to cure his health issues caused by urban life. He bought a farm for $750 and quickly realized that there was more money in renting rooms to summer boarders than there was in being a farmer. After a fruitful year earning $81, he expanded his enterprise. By the 1920s, the rise of big hotels took the Catskills by storm, almost all of which were exclusively Jewish. The sliver of Sullivan County that the newspapers dubbed the Borscht Belt was a haven for Jewish immigrants who were turned away from any other holiday destinations. When I was a little boy, my family went to Lake Sunapee in New Hampshire, and we were staying at a lodge on Lake Sunapee. My father's name was Maxwell Kotak, but he was known as Mac Kotak. My sister is 5 years older than I. I was a little boy. We were out in a boat, and we argued. Did any of you ever argue with your siblings? And I said to my sister, I swear on the Jewish Bible, the ice came that summer to Lake Sunapee and the inn we were in, and we left. Because all of a sudden, we weren't Mac Kotak, we were the Jews. Some of you may remember a movie before my time called Gentleman's Agreement, which was also about restricted hotels. And my understanding is Longport used to be a place where Jews couldn't buy homes. The Borscht Belt, these hotels became an ethnic destination. In the Catskills, Jews could eat kosher food, spend time with their families, engage in the very American practice of vacationing, a pastime that didn't exist before. As the popularity of the Jewish resorts continued to grow, the hotels expanded to epic proportions, becoming a beached version of a modern-day cruise ship, offering anyone would need under one roof. Do you guys remember going to those hotels? Probably not, ethnically. The maitre d', we used to, when I was on Long Island, we would have temple weekends at the Nevele. And the maitre d' at the Nevele, I'll never forget this, when you'd leave the dining room, he'd say, "Till we eat again." But you guys have been on cruise ships, right?
Yeah.
It's the same deal. They just move.
Actually, I grew up working in a kosher hotel in Atlantic City, Tikutskis.
Okay. Similar, right?
Oh, very, very, very kosher. On Friday nights, we couldn't even write down.
Right, what was people wanted?
Morning, they had to memorize it.
Cool.
You know?
Well, why was that hotel there? It was to serve people who had specific food needs, but also they weren't necessarily welcome at the train wharf.
Except one Saturday morning, the Mashkia
Yeah, the guy who made sure everything was kosher.
pulled me into the shul and put a prayer book in my hand because I had a big minion.
Oh, you did great. Thank you.
One hand, blue eyes.
Don't you remember Paul Newman? Okay.
He walked by and he said, "What are you doing in there? You're not Jewish."
Thousand Seat Theaters sprung up. Cast of characters, Milton Berle, Sid Caesar, Alan King, were largely credited with birthing America's comedy as we know it today. It was the Saturday Night Live of its time, sporting the great entertainers of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. It was the Catskills' golden era. Sports, too, were an important part. Remember the movie Dirty Dancing? Okay. Basketball, Will Chamberlain quite famously spent some time in the mountains working as a bellboy.
Oh my gosh.
Even though the push was to become Americanized, the phenomena that was the Catskills helped America learn about Judaism. It was a way to keep tradition while still adapting, not assimilating, but adapting. People did want to keep their Jewish culture alive, and this was a way to do it. The people running the Catskill resorts had the idea of the all-inclusive vacation that cruise ships later adopted. The hotels, Brickman's, Brown's, Concord, Grossinger's, Granite, Hyden Hotel, Irvington, Kutcher's, Country Club, the Nevele, Friar Tuck Inn, the Laurels. The list goes on and on. What drew Jews to the Catskills The Jewish ethos was complemented by a push to become Americanized. Golf, tennis, and styles seen as American became the norm in post-war period. The Borscht Belt flourished in the 40s. Large groups came with their families. They went on until the late 70s. In the 80s, there were more conventions to fill the hotels during the week, but a lot of family businesses started falling off in the 90s because the children didn't want to come up anymore. The kids now take cruises and go to Europe or Cancun. Grandma and Grandpa passed away, so it didn't have the same family feeling anymore. Think about the hotels, the casinos in Atlantic City. What's happened over the years with all of that? It was gangbusters, and now it's weekends. Here was one of the signs on the highway going there, listing all of the various places that existed. The honeymoon package for Grossinger's. Grossinger's had a very interesting process. They were a kosher hotel, which meant that they had dishes that were kosher. And they did the most unique thing. Every year, prior to the coming of Passover, they donated all of their glasses, their silverware, and their dishes. And they bought brand new ones for Passover so that they were kosher for Passover. Interesting kind of phenomenon. Young folks' paradise. Livingston Manor. Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds were married at Grossinger's. Eddie Fisher, Elizabeth Taylor, and Jenny Grossinger. Summertime pics. You see who's sitting at the table? The guy who was in Law and Order? Jerry Orbach, yeah. But look at the table. It's disgusting. Oh, sorry. The volume of food was it? It's like a ship. You know, you go up to the Lido deck and you can't believe that there are people who never get off the ship. All they do is they sit up there and they graze all day long. See, the Jewish community has influenced the world. Okay. So here's Kutsher's. Any of you remember the name Kutsher's? Monticello, New York. Look how beautiful. The dining room, the pool, Grossinger's. The dining room. The Concord. Concord was a flashier place. The Pines. The Browns. And there's the map of the area by Liberty and Monticello and where the hotels were. In the beginning of the end. In the 1960s, a Jewish migration to Miami and Los Angeles helped bring about the end of the Borscht Belt. Jews were moving around and becoming much more geographically mobile. Family structures changed, and people were not so tied to their extended families anymore. Bowling alone. At the same time, the divorce rate changed. By the 1980s and 90s, you also had a lot of intermarriages. So it didn't make much sense to go to an intensely Jewish community. At the end of the day, what did the Borscht Belt give to the world? The resorts were a getaway for many Jewish Americans, a pillar of New York culture that defined an era. The Borscht Belt Resort reached their peak in the 50s and 60s, accommodating up to 150,000 guests a year. The success of these resorts was attributed to many factors, including the lack of civil rights, which meant many Jews found themselves excluded from upscale resorts in other regions. At the start of the 70s, with the landmark declaration of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, patronage began to decline exponentially. Railroads began cutting service to the area, the popularity of air travel increased, and a younger generation of Jewish Americans chose other leisure destinations. By the mid-90s, the vast majority of the hotels were deserted, leaving cumulative memories with loyal patrons and an authentic museum of abandoned and decaying resorts behind. The 3 A's: assimilation, air conditioning, airlines. As prejudices waned, it became easier and ultimately desirable for Jews to fully assimilate. Once other holidaying destinations around the country lifted their ban on Jewish patrons, there was less of a need to coalesce in the Catskills. On a greater scale, assimilation chipped away at the tight family bonds formed long ago in the shtetls of Eastern Europe. A great number of American Jews intermarried with other faiths, and divorce became more commonplace. The younger generation, keen on being defined as American first before any other trait, saw little need to participate in Jewish activities as well. Paradigm. So here was the indoor-outdoor skating rink, a first at the Pines. Here it is. Wait. The Laurels Hotel and Country Club, the pool, the ballroom, Pressers, Grossingers today, actually knocked down, but the Pines. Brown's went on fire. The Nevele, deserted. Remember the hallway we saw a picture of? And yet, unknown to most people, the world of the Borscht Belt wasn't alone. In the Catskills, there was a mirror image of the same ethnic world, just a different one trying to hold on to its identity and culture. Part of what we're going to see, and what I wanted to show you this for, was there are patterns in American ethnicity. The Jewish community may stand out, but it wasn't alone. For a long while, the Irish Catskills had a very specific purpose. It was a place where the Irish held on to their heritage, and even as they were consciously assimilating, and where Americans went if they wanted to be Irish. For generations, the Ferguson family was a fixture on the Irish Catskills. Did any of you ever know about the Irish Catskills? Oh, this is so much fun for me. An enclave of inns, hotels, and bungalows in New York, famed vacation spot that was a summer gateway for many New York City area Irish. The mountain spring was an icon of the Irish Catskills, of course, but for me, there was also so much family and personal history wrapped up in the place. It was where my parents met. It was where I spent so many summers as a kid. It was where I proposed to my wife, and now it was gone. You can attach any group to that. There were 17 different places where you'd hear live Irish music 7 nights a week, and with some of the best Irish musicians, not just from New York, but from all over. You would go pub hopping down all those dark roads. It was almost impossible to drive through East Durham because there were mobs of people. It was just like the sign advertising his aunt and uncle's hotel said, the nearest thing to Ireland. A drive down Route 145 through East Durham nowadays yields very few such sightings, says Ferguson. You might notice a few shamrocks on the odd sign, but you have no idea what the place was like. The Irish Catskills were once as many as 50 Irish-themed inns sporting shamrocks on their shingles. They were the immigrants of the Bronx in Brooklyn, fleeing stifling tenements for the Catskills clean air, the traditional music, the dance, the camaraderie. It was like a little Ireland without having to go to Ireland, said John Connors, singer in the Irish Express. Again, it could be any ethnic group that used to pride itself on its community model. The 3 A's I mentioned, air conditioning, airlines, assimilation, are said to have been the resort community's downfall. After the mid-60s heyday, many immigrants had departed the tenements. Plane travel was no longer limited to the rich, and the Irish became, well, American. The same goes for other ethnic tribes that claimed other corners of the Catskills. The immense hotels of the so-called Borscht Belt, which served the Jewish clientele, have largely shut down. So that's the list of the various hotels that were the Irish Catskills. Dancing at the Crossroads. It was a film that was on PBS. You probably can get it on demand. Gavin's Irish Country Inn, the Catskills. Welcome to East Durham. East Durham Hotel. The crowds, same crowds, right? Just different names. Different food, but the same concepts, the same idea. Well, they threw a nun in every once in a while. There weren't a lot of those at the Borscht. Irish music. Yep, the Guinness Festival. The tables. McGrath's. I want you to capture the similarity in what I'm trying to bring to you tonight, because it really goes back to the roots of what does it mean to be part of a community. And ethnicity is something that America is not necessarily embracing anymore. You remember the controversy, we've talked a little bit about it this year, about melting pot. And the question was, who are we melting to be? And in reality, if you remember, it was to kind of turn everyone into the same identity. And then America tried to embrace a different model. And that was not of the melting pot, but of pluralism, which said to people, though they really haven't done it, be whoever you are. Just don't be offensive. Say hello to your neighbor. You can keep your own identities. You don't have to become us or make believe you're us or change your name so that you think you can not be pointed out as being different. But we've gotten way beyond that. You know, we're at the point now, and as I mentioned to you, I am a firm supporter of churches and synagogues and mosques if they are based in trying to maintain people's identity in the most positive and kind ways. But we're struggling against it. We have become the counterculture. We're now talking about ideas and concepts that are foreign to most people's mentalities. They don't think about that. I mean, if you go back in your own identities growing up, I am sure that wherever your parents grew up and when they started their own families, part of their intentions and plan was to make sure you went to a good school, to find a church or a synagogue that you felt comfortable in. It was part of the deal. Think about, we looked at some of the statistics, the Pew Report, which is a very, very reliable representation of American society and culture, talks about now that the largest group of Americans are referred to as nuns. People who don't belong anywhere. You know, and that more than 50% of the American population don't care about churches, they don't care about synagogues, they don't care about anything other than, you know, where they're going to go on vacation. And it's not to the Catskills. So why does the fiddler have such universal appeal? Because the fiddler speaks to everyone about ethnicity and identity. And the questions that we are struck with is, can the fiddler still be on the roof? How do we maintain identity in an assimilated world? And does identity really matter anymore? I believe it does. The question is, what are the characteristics of identity that should be cherished? When I was a rabbi on Long Island in Glen Cove, we had 3 ethnic Catholic churches. We had St. Rocco's, which was the designated Italian parish for all of Long Island. The priest had the best name, Grazie a Dio. Father, thank God. Okay, it was amazing. And they had a St. Rocco's feast that rivaled the Gennaro feast on Lower Manhattan. And Father Grazie a Dio would call up the old ladies and say, "You're gonna make me 1,000 of meatballs." And they would. So, ironically, besides St. Rocco's, there was St. Patrick's, which was the normative Irish church. It was where Bobby Kennedy carpetbagged when he ran for Senate from New York. There was also a Polish church. And because of my experiences and whatever, I have relationships with all of them. At one point, St. Rocco's took a trip to the Holy Land. And we had also had a temple trip to Israel. And we got the 2 groups together. We were in 2 different countries in very different centuries. They went to the Holy Land and really had no awareness at all of contemporary Israel. They had no idea about anything other than the Via Dolorosa and Bethlehem and whatever else. The Catholic Polish Church and I would do programs because they still had an ethnic identity of their people who had been killed in the Holocaust. And they were killed for different reasons, but it was still a burden and a pain. And we shared that. But those churches aren't what they were at one point. They're not really representing that population because as people have aged in America, it seems that not only do they strip off possession, but they seem to drop their identities that they were concerned about. And if they don't do it, it's very clear that their children don't necessarily see the same value, need, or desire to maintain that level of culture. America is a powerful, powerful type of force. It's not necessarily a force for identity in these days. Some of you are familiar with the Jewish festival of Hanukkah, which is once again, a very universal experience. So let's talk about that for just a second. What is the story? There's a history behind it all. The Greeks, who had taken over the Middle East by empire, were unique in their empire building, very discreetly different from other empires of the past, and probably empires that have moved beyond them. They were not only militarily powerful, which meant that they could subdue other areas, cultures, and societies. But they also offered people something unique, and that was Hellenism. They allowed people who were not of Greek origin to become part of the cultural umbrella of Greek society, which was Hellenism. So, when we look at the ancient Near East of that time period, it was not uncommon that people just got rid of whatever their identities were and became Hellenized. They could enter into the Greek society and culture. Well, the Egyptians totally gave up their identity because they were seduced by the power of Hellenism to join into it. The story that is at our crux here is that the Greeks, very much like modern power countries, use others as their surrogates. The Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas are representative of Iran. We know that. They're funded by and supported. Well, the Syrians were a client state of the Greek Empire, and they conquered the land of Israel. This takes place around 168 BCE, 2,300 years ago. They take over the land and they convert the central temple into a shrine to Greek gods. It's kind of a statement to those who live there, don't you think? Well, some people found it not to be a problem because they wanted to be Greek and become part of that culture, which was so seductive. A group of people known as the Maccabees decide to revolt. 168 BCE, they begin a revolt against the Syrians, who represent the Greeks. 3 years later, they actually accomplish that and identify themselves separate from the Greek as an independent entity. The story of Hanukkah gets caught up in ways that are silly in America, and is kind of an insight into the cultural struggles. For many Jewish parents, Hanukkah becomes the Christmas substitute. Okay? It's like, oh, I don't want my kids not to feel like they're being taken care of, so we'll do this instead. Let me tell you, as a rabbi, as an academic, it's as offensive as it is to Christian clergy who find Christmas being turned into something it was never intended to be. Nonetheless, the story that we are looking at is a very interesting one, because the story that most people grab onto is the oil. They couldn't find the oil lasted, oh my gosh, look at the menorah, it's so beautiful. In my language, it's a boogamisa, okay? Why is that important? It's an insight into, I believe, Jewish culture and society. The story is about a military victory. Rather than aggrandize the military victory, they find a solution in transforming it into an ethnic embrace of God's power in the society that the light maintained itself. We know that that time of December is a time that is historically, people are aware that it's getting darker and darker. Well, there was a festival known as Saturnalia, which was symbolic magic, where they would light lights to try and force the gods into saying, don't make it dark all the time, bring the light back. Well, you see some of that in Christian mythology about the way in which December 25th is viewed. It's something that we share, certainly in the story of Hanukkah, that embraces this concept of light over darkness. It's something that's powerful among both of our societies and our cultures. My point here is Hanukkah is a powerful message of internal identity. Some of you may remember when cults were very, very big in America, or at least you learned about them. And there was one that was run by the Reverend Sun Myung Moon out of Korea, okay? The Hare Krishnas. And they were everywhere, okay? And they were capturing young people, and they had a process known as love bombing, where they would find kids who were kind of lonely a little bit, alone, a little bit distracted, and they would embrace them. And then they would sleep deprive them, and then they would change their calorie intake, and then they would condition them to believe that everybody on the outside was the enemy, but they had the truth. There was a gentleman named Patrick, last name was Patrick. He was a former Marine, some of you may remember this, who was involved in being hired by families to capture their children out of cults. Okay. I met a young man named Peter Tipograph, who is now a practicing attorney, but he had been embraced by the Reverend Sun Myung Moon and was part of that group. His parents engaged, I forgot what his last name was Patrick, I don't remember his first name, to kidnap his son, their son, out of this. And I had the opportunity to have him come and talk to the congregation on a Friday night about his experience. I was a little kid at the time, okay. I really was. I think I might have been 30 or 29. And Peter spoke to the congregation, very moving about his own life and experience. And we went to sit down in my study afterwards. And I said, so Peter, what do you hope to do now? I'm going to take a course on consumer credit to help people who are in debt. That's great, Peter. I said, well, now that you're no longer involved with the Moonies, do you think you might be interested in learning about your Judaism, because you're a Jewish kid? And he looked at me and he said, would you be my teacher? And I was wise enough, or stupid enough, to have the red lights go off in my head. And what I learned from that encounter was, you can take a person out of a particular environment. You can remove whatever that module is that they had been embraced with. But unless they are willing to return it on their own, they are available to other people who will provide them with some type of identity. So how did the Jewish community survive the more powerful Greeks? Internally, they knew who and what they were. In the same way, in the culture that you and I are living in today, we can lose our way unless you know who you are. Okay? In many ways, the idea of consumerism is more appealing than necessarily sitting down and reading the Bible. Identity today isn't necessarily about ideology. In many ways, it's about silly things. TikTok, Instagram, influencers. You talk to young people, what do they want to be? They want to be influencers. Okay, it used to be they wanted to be sports stars. Now they want to be influencers. There's a documentary on Netflix called Almost Famous, which I recommend to you. A couple of really smart people decided they were going to expose the whole concept of influencing. You're familiar with how this works, right? Or what it's about. So they put an ad in one of the newspapers that they were looking for people to become influencers. And they interviewed a whole host of people. They identified 3 or 4 of them, and they set them up with identities. And they also set them up using what are known as bots, which are computer-generated things where they had hundreds of thousands of followers. They weren't real people. They just showed up on their Facebook page or on their TikTok or Instagram as a way to try and build what appeared to be their credibility to represent or to be an influencer. Ironically, my son's wife is involved in this business as a digital advertiser. So she has told me stories where there were people who were willing to pay Sofia Vergara $250,000 to wear a banana suit for 30 seconds. She wouldn't do it. But they found a young, very hip dermatologist in New York City who was getting paid between $40,000 and $60,000 for 30-second blips on TikTok about products. Nobody looks at a magazine anymore to see what an ad is. It's all done in this manner, and it reflects, much to my disappointment, the fragility of what value systems are that we're functioning with in this society, which has a lot to do with this idea of, if you know who you are, then you can, with almost a guardable shield about you, figure out how to fit into the society and the culture as opposed to being swallowed by it and overwhelmed. So from my perception, the work that's before us is trying to build not only internally the identity of this particular community, but also to be able to share that with your friends. I'm being an evangelist right now, okay? Because I really think many of the people you know are the guy who lives in the house by himself. Now, they may not be sleeping with a shotgun on their lap, but I'm sure they have guns in their houses. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily wrong, depending on why you have them, but also the fact that most people are really inherently terribly lonely in this society that we are living in now. They won't admit it. But why shouldn't a church or a synagogue be a respite from the loneliness of the world that's out there? And it's not necessarily about theology, okay? A story. When I was in Rochester, the temple and the congregation that I was with had been founded in 1848. We had 5,000 people in the synagogue. We were one of 12 congregations in Rochester, Jewish congregations. My predecessor had developed a very strong relationship with one of the African American churches in town, which on paper, other than the color of the people's skin, was very similar to my congregation, economically, educationally, and so on. They had a ski club, okay? And we would have a relationship with them. We would do study groups together, we would have baseball games together, and we would do the symbolic Martin Luther King weekend, where whoever their reverend was at the time would come on Friday night and speak, and I would go there on Sunday morning and speak. And I would always encourage the congregation to come, and they had like an 80-year relationship with the place, so people would show up. But in addition, I would require that our 10th grade students come with their families, our confirmation class. And it was a very lively place. They had great music, great choirs, a band. I mean, they were rocking, okay? And they were very pleasant and polite. Now, I mentioned to you earlier on the distinction between liturgical and non-liturgical churches. That church is non-liturgical. They do a lot of Jesus loves you, and thank God you're here, let's sing a song, we'll dance in the aisles, okay. So afterwards, I would debrief my students, and I would say, what'd you think? It was fantastic! It was so cool, it was amazing, the music. I said, what's a message? Did you get any messages there? It was the religion of friendship, which isn't a bad thing, okay? Which isn't a bad thing. How many people know each other in a contemporary church or synagogue on a Friday night? I used to tell my board members, when you come to our coffee and cake after services on a Friday night, stand on the side and watch people. People gravitate to the people they know, and they never move to the other person, okay? It's part of what we're looking at tonight. My suggestion is, go over and say hello to someone. People, I'm embarrassed, I've met them 12 times, I don't remember their name. So what? So what, okay? I think we have to embrace a different model. And I'm an advocate of it. I think that there is something to be said for opening the windows, opening the doors, and acknowledging to people that you want to be different. And I think we can make a difference. Look at the fact, I'm here studying with you guys. When's the last time, besides last year, a rabbi came and taught here? Huh? Okay? Well,
Yes, Vicky, she'll tell you, Rabbi, that comes in and used to even give sermons in the church.
well, look, I'm thankful for this. I've been doing this my whole career, and it's something that I believe is critically important. Not that we're the same. Yes, we share things together. We have differences, and let's be kind about our differences as opposed to making them into the Crusades. Okay? But that only comes with openness and acknowledgement, and I believe a whole bunch of hope and opportunity. So thank you.
Okay, what is it, Matthew?
And I'm all about maintaining history too, in every way,
Yes.
but who we are, and let's maintain that and not lose who we are. But do you see a conflict in doing that, and then loving your neighbor from this church, the Irish hotel and the Jewish hotel? Well, I'm going to say the Jewish hotel, no, I'm going to say the Irish hotel. Does that create walls?
I wish there were still Irish hotels and Jewish hotels for at least to us to experience.
Does it build prejudice?
Well, it certainly did, because people only wanted to hang out with their own.
Yeah.
Okay? Neighborhoods used to be neighborhoods, you know, and they were ethnic. And it didn't necessarily accrue great to other minorities who walked through those neighborhoods. That's not the positive thing that I'm really hoping for. I think a lot of that old stuff hopefully is gone, and if not, we should decry it for today. But I do believe it's fine for people to take the positive aspects of who and what they are and not see that as ultimately exclusive or discriminatory against the other. Okay?
Or superior.
That's right, or superior, which is the way in which it's been interpreted. When we looked at the material last week, we saw that the failure of emancipation in Europe came about because even though you could legally say everybody was equal, they really weren't because of the prejudices. Gosh, just look at the failure of segregation in this country, okay? Now, some things have changed and some things are better, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's really better, okay? And maybe we don't have to have the blinders on that say, It's a failure, but maybe we have to say, we're not there yet, but it doesn't mean we have to give it up. I don't think everybody should be homogenized into one group, okay? I don't think everybody is the same, but so what? It doesn't threaten me unless I'm being threatened. And that happens a lot too, and certainly since October 7th, that's become more and more part of, I believe, the American and the worldwide Jewish community's self-perception of itself, that it is isolated. So, other thoughts? Yes, please.
Every time we talk about all of this, I think about the Hasidic community, in New York. That strong community of people that just literally, they all support each other, they're...
Right.
But so I've read some things and I've watched some things and I've learned a lot about them because it's interesting to me. And I feel like I understand why they do what they do. Like, how does that all kind of relate?
Okay, let me say this. I probably have more in common with all of you in this room than I do with them.
Yeah, but
Okay.
they're their own...
They don't necessarily acknowledge my identity, okay? And in the same way, look, we have the Amish who are in their own environment. And as I pointed out to you, there were 3 dominant responses to emancipation. If the ghetto walls aren't there, we'll create them ourselves for ourselves. That is a reflection of what the Orthodox community tried to do as it evolved in trying to deal with modernity.
That's exactly what I thought of when you were talking.
Yes.
100%.
And those communities in Brooklyn are their own entities. They're Jewish Amish, okay? And
In Lakewood also.
Lakewood also,
Yes,
okay? They are their own world,
yes.
and they don't necessarily open it up. The only one of all of the Hasidic iterations, which all began localized in communities in Eastern Europe, are the people, as I mentioned, who come from Lvov, a town in Poland, who became Lubavitch. Lubavitch is the only group that allows outsiders in, and they are some of the most incredible fundraisers you will ever meet in your life. They are brilliant in extracting resources from assimilated and liberal Jews, because people say, oh God, they're so authentic. They're not authentic to me, okay? But they are, you could learn a lot, okay? And look, we've talked about the incredible diversity within the Protestant community. You know, where there are right-wing groups that look at you like you don't exist, okay? Like you're a joke. And, okay. Sir.
Yes, well, a couple of perceptions, I think. One is that obviously the disintegration of their identity as one cultural group or one, you know, is a lot of that has to do with, in America, with intermarriages.
Yes.
I mean, which has been an issue, you know, for many years. It's certainly been an issue in synagogues, you know, because there are some synagogues who are concerned, you know, that a Jewish person might marry a Christian woman and be taken away from the synagogue and thereby dissolve the solidity of that synagogue. But we also have the issue, on the other hand, where a lot of nationalities remain strong. Early in the century, okay, when the Irish came to the United States, you know, they wanted to stay together as a group because it helped protect themselves.
Yes.
You know, from being attacked from other people.
Yes.
It happened with Germans, it happened with Italians.
Absolutely.
With everybody. You know, but as we matured as a country, and as we began to intermarry and develop friendships and become more enlightened, you know, I see this having disappeared, which is not a bad thing.
Some of the aspects of it, yes, we are glad that those have disappeared. Other aspects of it, I think, are worth reconsidering.
But
Okay.
but people will always say to you, even today, so what are you anyway? What's your background? What's your nationality?
Young people don't.
You know what they do? As a matter of fact, we just got off a cruise ship.
Yeah.
You know, and as we're getting off the cruise ship, okay, one of the places, one of the stops on the cruise, I had these little kiosks. And one of the kiosks, you know, was selling these placards with your name, your last name, okay, and what the heritage of your
Okay.
last name is, and the background. Doing quite a business.
Good. Look, I just forgot what I was just going to tell. Oh, 45. No. I came back to me. Jews aren't the only ones who are dealing with the phenomenon of intermarriage. 45% of Catholics do not marry Catholics. And in many cases, it used to be that if a Catholic married a Protestant, they would go either to the Protestant or to the Catholic Church. Now they don't go anywhere.
I'll tell you a quick story, very quick story. When I was growing up,
Go for it.
I liked this Catholic girl, and I told my mother, you know, I kind of like this girl, and I kind of like to, you know, maybe ask her out. And my mother was so upset.
Yes.
Oh, she's Catholic.
Yeah.
But then I met a Jewish girl from Margate, and I said, you know, I kind of like that girl, and I think I might want to ask her out. Oh, she's a nice Jewish girl.
Look, I will tell you a story. There is a book called Rebecca's Children. No, that isn't it. Paul Cowan wrote a book called Orphan in History. Paul Cowan's father was a corporate vice president of CBS, lived in Chicago. The Cowans used to be the Cohens. They changed their name, whatever. Paul Cowan came to New York and was a writer for the Village Voice. And he was among those who uncovered elderly Jews who had been isolated in apartments in Brooklyn and the Bronx and abandoned basically by their families to live in ultimate poverty in these hellholes that they were living in. He wrote a book called Orphan in History about his own struggle with identity and coming to grips with it. He ended up marrying a woman, Rachel, who became Rachel Cowan, whose family traced their ancestry back to the Mayflower. Okay? And there's a wonderful joke about that. Someone who comes from the Mayflower says to the Jew, you know, my family came on the Mayflower. And the Jewish person says, yeah, our family came when the immigration laws were a little stricter. Okay? You can use that one. In any event, Rachel, who was waspier than a wasp, became a rabbi.
Wow.
And Neil died. Rachel continued his work, their work together. But in the midst of it, they wrote a book called Mixed Blessings, where they interviewed couples who had intermarried or were choosing to become intermarried. And what was fascinating about their study was the mythology on both sides. Jewish men marrying Christian women saw them to be kinder, nicer, and softer than Jewish women. Christian women saw Jewish men as being kinder, nicer. Okay, what's the point? The point is, the other always looks better than what you know, okay? But to your point, yes, ethnicity in America, you go back to that movie, The Gangs of New York, the Irish beat the out of the Italians or the Jews or whatever. I don't want that. I just want people to identify themselves in some way. And if they don't want to identify themselves in terms of their ethnic, historic history, let them identify themselves as kind, caring Christians. Okay? or let them identify themselves as kind, caring Muslims, or Sikhs, or Jews, but be something. Okay, and what I'm challenged by is that most people don't want to be anything. Okay, they just want to be, don't bother me, like the guy in the story from 1970. All right? And that was an extreme, certainly, but if that's the identity of being an American, I don't like that. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.